In the middle of the ocean, where there is no land in sight, a city floats. Its weight is so massive that if it tried to drive down a normal city street, the ground beneath it would collapse. This doesn't look like a ship. It looks like a floating airbase, a monster that sails on water, launches aircraft into the sky, and fights wars. People think it's just a really big ship, but the truth is far stranger than that. This single machine carries more firepower than the entire air force of most countries on Earth. Today, we're going inside this floating fortress, we're going to see exactly how it works, and we're going to understand how a 100,000-ton piece of metal never sinks. Let's clear up something most people get wrong right away. People assume a carrier doesn't sink simply because it's huge. But if size alone kept things afloat, a giant boulder should float too, and it doesn't. The real secret is density and shape. The part of the carrier that sits underwater displaces so much water that the weight of that displaced water is actually greater than the weight of the ship itself. This is Archimedes' principle in action. Picture dropping an empty bowl into water, it floats, but melt that same metal into a solid ball, and it sinks instantly. A carrier's hull works the same way, hollow on the inside, but built so tough on the outside that almost nothing can tear through it. But staying afloat is the easy part. The real challenge is controlling this floating city when more than 5,000 people are living inside it, when 60 to 90 fighter jets are parked on its deck, and when 2 nuclear reactors are burning beneath everyone's feet. Yes, modern supercarriers don't run on diesel or coal. They run on nuclear reactors that generate so much energy the ship can sail for 20 to 25 years without ever needing to refuel. Imagine a car that never needs gas for 2.5 decades. These reactors produce enough electricity to power a small city on their own. Now here's the real question. If this enormous ship is sitting out in open water, how do fighter jets even land on it? This is where things start to get genuinely strange. A normal airport runway stretches close to 3,000 meters. A carrier's flight deck is only around 300 meters long. That's 10 times shorter than what a regular jet needs to take off. It sounds like nothing should ever be able to launch from a deck that small. But engineers built a system that essentially cheats physics. It's called the catapult. Think of a slingshot. A slingshot gives a stone enormous speed in a fraction of a second. A carrier's catapult does exactly that, except instead of a stone, it's launching a 25-ton fighter jet. This catapult, whether steam-powered or electromagnetic, accelerates the jet from a complete stop to roughly 260 kilometers per hour in under 2 seconds. Pilots describe it as feeling like a giant hand grabbed them from behind and threw them into the sky. Without this catapult, no jet could ever generate enough speed to take off from such a short deck. But if takeoff is this intense, landing should be even more dangerous. And you'd be exactly right. When a jet returns to land on the carrier, the pilot doesn't really have room to brake. In fact, during landing, the pilot doesn't slow down at all. They push the engine to full throttle. That sounds backwards, but the reason is simple. If the jet's tailhook misses all 3 or 4 arresting wires stretched across the deck, the pilot needs to be able to take off again instantly, otherwise the jet goes straight into the ocean. That's why every single carrier landing is approached at full power, ready to abort and launch back into the sky in a heartbeat. Those wires, called arresting wires, are connected to a massive hydraulic system. The moment the jet's hook catches a wire, this system slams the jet from 260 kilometers per hour down to a complete stop in roughly 2 seconds. It's like stopping a speeding car instantly using nothing but a long rope. The G-force a pilot feels in that moment is comparable to a violent roller coaster crash. This is considered the single most dangerous routine maneuver in aviation, and every pilot practices it thousands of times before ever attempting it on a real carrier. So while all of this is happening in the air, what's actually happening down on the deck? You wouldn't believe it, but the flight deck is considered one of the most dangerous workplaces on the planet, and it's not just because of the jets. More than 200 people work the flight deck at any given time, and the color of their jacket tells you exactly what their job is. Yellow jackets direct the aircraft, red jackets handle weapons, purple jackets handle fuel, and green jackets manage the catapult system. The entire operation is so tightly coordinated that a jet is either launching or landing roughly every 20 to 25 seconds. It's like watching a perfectly choreographed dance where one mistimed second can cost someone their life. The exhaust from a jet engine is so powerful that if a crew member accidentally stands behind it, they can be blasted straight off the deck into the ocean. That's exactly why this is often called the most dangerous office in the world. We've seen how jets take off and land, but here's the real question. How do you control a 100,000-ton ship in the middle of open ocean when a storm hits, or worse, when enemy missiles are incoming? This is where the carrier's true brain comes into play, known as the bridge. The captain controls the entire ship from here, but in reality, no single human is doing this alone anymore. A modern carrier is packed with thousands of sensors, constantly monitoring weather, ocean currents, and enemy movement every single second. The system is advanced enough that the ship can adjust its own course automatically to avoid the worst of an approaching storm. But the real danger isn't the weather, it's enemy missiles. You'd assume a target this enormous would be impossible to defend. But here's where the carrier pulls off another trick that genuinely surprises people. A carrier never sails alone. It's always surrounded by what's called a strike group, made up of destroyers, cruisers, and submarines. Together, they form an invisible shield. The moment any missile or enemy aircraft shows up on radar, this entire group reacts together, sometimes intercepting with missiles, sometimes blinding the enemy's radar through electronic jamming. The carrier itself is almost never the lone target. It's protected by this invisible web at all times. But what if something actually breaks through? Could a single hit really sink something this massive? Here's a fact most people don't know. A carrier's hull isn't one single shell, it's divided into countless watertight compartments, almost like dozens of smaller ships welded together into one giant structure. If part of the hull is damaged and water starts flooding in, an automatic system seals off that section instantly to protect the rest of the ship. This design is so robust that history has very few cases of a major carrier being completely sunk from a single direct hit. This floating fortress isn't just built for power, it's built to survive. In fact, these ships are deliberately over-engineered with the assumption that combat damage is inevitable. The real design challenge isn't preventing every hit, it's making sure the ship keeps functioning even after taking one. Now think about how a ship this massive, with this much going on, actually functions day to day. This is where another hidden side of the carrier reveals itself, one most people never think about. A carrier isn't just a warship, it's a complete floating city. It has a bakery that produces thousands of pieces of bread and pastries daily, a hospital ready for minor surgeries, its own post office, and sometimes even a chapel where the crew can pray. Water never runs out because the carrier has its own system for converting seawater into millions of gallons of clean drinking water every day. That system is powerful enough to supply the entire crew every jet's maintenance needs, and the kitchen, all from ocean water alone. But among all of this, there's one threat that constantly hangs over the carrier, and it doesn't come from the sky at all. Submarines are a carrier's quietest enemy. The ship is so massive it's nearly impossible to hide from radar, but a submarine can move silently underwater and approach without anyone knowing. That's why every carrier is always accompanied by at least one attack submarine, constantly hunting for any enemy submarine hiding beneath the surface. This underwater conflict is so silent that if two submarines accidentally get too close to each other, neither crew may even realize it until it's almost too late. A carrier's biggest line of defense isn't visible at all, it's hiding in the depths of the ocean. So how do thousands of people live on this ship for such long stretches, sometimes 6 to 9 months, without ever seeing their families? This isn't just a story about a machine, it's also a human story. sailors join a carrier crew at 18 or 19 years old and go through intense training to be able to work in any part of this floating city. Some maintain the jets, some manage the reactor, some focus purely on flight deck safety. Every single person is a small but essential part of a massive machine. Modern technology now lets them video call their families, but spending months at sea with no land in sight, nothing but ocean and sky, is still one of the toughest tests of human endurance there is. And now, for the most surprising part, something very few people actually know. You'd think the world's largest carrier is just a ship that carries jets and missiles. But in reality, it can generate more flying hours than most entire national air forces because it has its own air traffic control, its own weather station, and its own intelligence center. This single floating base can run an entire air campaign against another country without needing a single land base, thousands of kilometers away, without asking anyone's permission. That's exactly why whichever country owns this technology can project power into almost any corner of the world without putting a single soldier on the ground. There's also a hidden side to this story, the carrier's own memory. Every major carrier carries a data system that records every takeoff, every landing, every shift in weather, and every mission. This data isn't just kept for history, it's used to make the design of the next carrier even smarter, safer, and more powerful. Every carrier that sails essentially teaches the next generation how to be better. Now picture the sheer scale of this thing another way. If you stood the flight deck on its end, it would be taller than a 20-story building. Inside the hull, there's enough space to hold 60 to 90 fighter jets, dozens of helicopters, thousands of crew members, and millions of gallons of fuel all at once. The anchor alone is so massive, it needs its own separate crane just to lift it. When a carrier pulls into port, people describe watching it rise out of the ocean like a mountain, a sight that's hard for anyone to forget. But here's something genuinely interesting. How does something this massive and heavy stay stable enough in open water for jets to land on it safely? The answer is a stabilization system built into the ship that automatically counters rolling and tilting caused by waves. When the sea gets rough, the system shifts heavy internal machinery and ballast to keep the deck as level as possible. It's similar to a tightrope walker using a long balancing pole, except here the balance being managed is a 100,000-ton ship. There's also the carrier's own arsenal that people rarely think about. The ship carries short-range missiles and close-in weapon systems designed to shoot down incoming missiles or drones at the very last second. These systems fire so fast, the human eye can barely track them. The instant radar identifies a threat, these guns open fire automatically, sometimes unloading hundreds of rounds in a single second. This is the last line of defense if every other layer of protection fails. Carriers aren't only built for war either. When an earthquake strikes or a major storm devastates a coastline, a carrier can send helicopters and medical teams to deliver aid almost immediately because it already has its own hospital, its own power supply, and its own water purification system. In moments like these, the carrier transforms from a warship into a floating relief base capable of responding faster than almost any country simply because it never needed an airport or harbor to begin with. Despite all these capabilities, building a carrier is one of the most expensive and time-consuming projects in the world. From design to launch, a new carrier typically takes 7 to 10 years, involving thousands of engineers, welders, and scientists. The cost is so enormous it could fund the entire economy of a small country. But the nations that invest in this aren't just buying a warship, they're buying the ability to project power into any corner of the globe, with or without a land base nearby. In the end, when you put this entire story together, you realize an aircraft carrier isn't just a warship, it's a combination of human intelligence, physics, and sheer courage unlike anything else ever built. It's a world where the difference between life and death can come down to a few inches, and yet thousands of people execute their jobs flawlessly here every single day. This floating fortress isn't just a symbol of power, it's proof that when humanity sets its mind to it, we can take control of both the ocean and the sky at once. There's one more layer to this story that rarely gets talked about: the people who actually fly off this deck for the first time. Becoming a carrier pilot isn't just about flying well, it's about retraining your entire instinct for what landing even means. Pilots spend years practicing on land-based simulated decks before they're ever allowed to attempt a real carrier landing at sea. Even experienced pilots describe their first night landing on a carrier as one of the most terrifying experiences of their career, trying to line up a moving 300-meter target in pitch darkness, with no horizon, no runway lights stretching into the distance, just a small lit strip rising and falling with the waves. Many pilots say nothing in training ever fully prepares you for how small that deck looks when you're coming in at 260 kilometers per hour with the ocean waiting beneath you. It's also worth understanding just how much coordination happens before a single jet ever launches. Every mission starts hours in advance in a room called the Combat Direction Center, essentially the nerve center of the entire ship. Here, officers track every aircraft, every ship, and every potential threat within hundreds of kilometers, feeding constant updates to the bridge and to pilots preparing to launch. Nothing on a carrier happens spontaneously. Every single takeoff is the result of a complex chain of decisions made by dozens of people working together in near silence, communicating through headsets and hand signals that look almost like a secret language to outsiders. Something else that surprises people is how a carrier handles its own waste and fuel logistics while staying at sea for months without resupply. Carriers carry millions of gallons of jet fuel stored deep within the hull, completely separated from crew areas for safety. Replenishment ships periodically meet the carrier in open water to transfer fuel, food, and supplies through a process called underway replenishment, where two massive ships sail side by side at matching speed while cables transfer cargo between them. This maneuver alone is incredibly delicate, requiring split-second timing because even a small miscalculation could cause two of the largest moving objects on the planet to collide in open water. The flight deck itself also hides another secret beneath it, an entire second world known as the hangar bay. This massive enclosed space sits just below the flight deck and functions as a garage, workshop, and storage facility for aircraft not currently in use. Giant elevators move jets between the hangar bay and the flight deck in seconds, allowing the crew to constantly rotate aircraft in and out without ever slowing down operations above. Mechanics work around the clock in the hangar bay, repairing engines, replacing parts, and preparing jets for their next mission, often working in spaces so tight that veteran crew members can navigate them blindfolded simply from years of muscle memory. Communication on a carrier is another world of its own, because engine noise on the flight deck can reach levels loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage within seconds. Almost nobody speaks out loud during actual flight operations. Instead, crew members rely entirely on a system of hand signals, body positioning, and colored wands at night to direct aircraft safely. A single misread signal could mean a jet rolling into another aircraft or off the side of the deck entirely, so every signal is standardized and drilled relentlessly until it becomes second nature. Looking toward the future, carrier technology is evolving faster than most people realize. Newer designs are beginning to integrate unmanned combat drones that can take off, complete missions, and land entirely without a human pilot on board, flying alongside traditional manned jets. Electromagnetic catapults are gradually replacing older steam systems, offering smoother launches with far less mechanical strain and maintenance. Some next-generation designs are even testing directed energy weapons, lasers capable of disabling incoming missiles or drones almost instantly without firing a single physical round. What feels like science fiction today is likely to be standard equipment on major carriers within the next decade. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to our channel and like this video. There are countless more secrets hidden between the sea and the sky, and we'll be uncovering them with you in the next video. See you next time.